It began with a low, trembling hum that no one could place, a vibration crawling beneath the surface of the world like something enormous turning in its sleep. At first, people blamed faulty power lines, distant construction, even their own imagination. But the hum grew, deeper, closer, persistent enough to make windows quiver and dogs whine at empty corners. I remember standing at my apartment window, the street lights flickering in perfect sync with the unseen pulse, and thinking that the world felt like a machine straining under a weight it was never built to carry. When the sky dimmed in the middle of the afternoon, clouds thinning into a strange gray veil that swallowed sunlight instead of scattering it, the hum abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It pressed against your eardrums like the air had forgotten how to move. People stepped outside, shielding their eyes from the dimness, confused murmurs rippling through neighborhoods. Phones didn't connect. Radios hissed. The world had simply paused. That's when the first shadow moved, longer than it should have been, bending in a direction the fading light didn't support. I told myself it was a trick of the strange sky, an overactive mind stirred by the tension crawling across everyone's faces. But then, the shadow stretched again, and this time, it turned, as though aware it was being watched. My breath froze, not because of what it looked like, but because shadows shouldn't turn. They shouldn't tilt their heads or hesitate with the gentle curiosity of something waking up. I stepped back from the window, heart pounding as the shadow slid along the wall of the building across from mine. It clung to the bricks like oil, then thinned, narrowing to a point that crawled upward. I don't know how long I stood there, gripping the window frame. I only know I didn't blink until the shadow vanished into the darkening sky, melting into the unnatural gloom like it had been called home. That night, the lights never came back on. Candles flickered in apartment windows like a patchwork of fragile stars. Some people gathered in hallways or stairwells, clinging to the comfort of human voices. Others locked themselves inside, hoping sleep would deliver clarity or escape. I didn't sleep. I kept hearing the memory of that hum, pulsing in silence like an echo stuck inside my skull. Around midnight, there was a sound outside, soft, deliberate scraping, as though something was searching for a way in. I approached the door and held my breath. The scratching stopped. Then a single knock echoed down the hallway, slow and measured, like someone testing the concept of knocking rather than requesting entry. No one moved. The air felt too thick to breathe. Another knock, heavier, followed. Then another. Apartment doors creaked open as people peeked into the darkness. A faint shuffle came from the far end of the corridor, accompanied by a whisper. No, not a whisper, more like breath being pushed through teeth too long and too sharp. I closed my door before I saw anything, but through the peephole, I caught a glimpse of something sliding past, tall and impossibly thin, its limbs bending as though joints were optional suggestions. When it reached the far stairwell, the corridor lights flickered weakly, then went black again. The thing didn't need light to move. It disappeared into the darkness, leaving nothing but a lingering scent of cold earth, like freshly opened graves after rain. By morning, if morning could still be called that under the ashen sky, the city felt hollowed out. Buildings stood, streets lay still, but everything felt abandoned, as though the world itself had retreated. The hum returned, low and steady, vibrating the ground in a rhythmic pattern that reminded me of an enormous heartbeat. The shadows lengthened unnaturally again, some stretching across entire avenues. I needed to leave the apartment, if only to reassure myself that people still existed. Outside, neighbors stood in wary clusters, exchanging fragmented accounts, lights moving behind fogged windows, footsteps inside walls, voices calling from places no voice should reach. No one spoke above a whisper. It felt wrong to disturb the haze that smothered the city. We listened to the hum together, waiting for it to stop again, fearful of what would follow when it did. It cut off abruptly around noon, plunging us back into that suffocating silence. And then the wind began, cold, sharp, carrying faint cries that didn't sound entirely human. The sky twisted, the clouds spiraling like something buried beneath them was rising. People ran for shelter, but I couldn't move. Something in that sky felt alive, aware, hungry. The darkness above churned, folding inward until the clouds formed a massive, convulsing shape that pulsed with a lightless glow. And as I stared, rooted to the pavement, I realized the glow wasn't light at all, just the reflected gleam of something watching us from inside the storm. As the clouds tore open, something spilled out, thick strands of darkness that writhed like tendrils searching for purchase. They slid across rooftops, coiling around chimneys and antennas, pulling themselves forward with unsettling purpose. One touched a power line, and every bulb in a 5-block radius exploded at once, showering sparks that vanished before touching the ground. A woman screamed nearby, but the sound was swallowed by the heavy air, muffled as though wrapped in cloth. The tendrils continued spreading, branching like veins across the skyline, each movement deliberate and disturbingly organic. I ducked into an alley, crouching behind overturned trash bins, watching the darkness seep into windows and door frames. From somewhere deep within one of the buildings, a chorus of metallic creaks echoed, like hundreds of hinges twisting at the same time. When the first door burst open, something staggered out. Not a creature, not a person, something in between. Its figure flickered, its outline shifting as though struggling to remember the shape it was trying to imitate. It tilted its head, sniffing the air, and then turned toward me. I froze. Its eyes, if they could be called that, glowed faintly, like dying embers trapped beneath glass. It stepped forward, its movements jerky but fast. I tried to back away quietly, but the gravel crunched beneath my shoe. The creature lunged. I stumbled through the alley, the creature's distorted silhouette darting across the walls. It didn't run normally. Its limbs bent too far, its spine arching and snapping back with each stride. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, its form seemed slightly different, as though it was rewriting itself between moments. I squeezed through a broken metal gate and fled into a courtyard littered with abandoned bicycles and toppled chairs. The creature crashed into the gate behind me, warping its shape as it forced itself through the narrow gap. I bolted for a small basement door and yanked it open, throwing myself inside before slamming it shut. Darkness swallowed me. My breath came in ragged gasps. For a moment, there was silence. Then a soft tapping on the door. Slow, patient, testing. I backed away, hands trembling, as the tapping turned into scraping, metal against wood, like claws dragging across the frame. Then, abruptly, it stopped. Something whispered through the gap beneath the door, an imitation of my own voice, distorted and thin, calling my name. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it kept speaking, repeating my name with nauseating familiarity until, finally, mercifully, it faded. Hours passed in that basement, lit only by a weak beam of light slipping through a cracked window. The hum never returned. Instead, an eerie stillness settled over the city, broken only by distant thuds and occasional shrill cries that rose and died within seconds. I knew I couldn't stay. The air felt wrong, heavier with each breath, as though the basement itself was slowly sealing shut. I pushed open the door cautiously, stepping into a world rearranged by darkness. The tendrils no longer writhed. They hung still, suspended between buildings like grotesque decorations. They pulsed faintly, as though carrying something inside them. The streets were empty, but not silent. A faint echo traveled between the buildings, rhythmic and measured, like footsteps approaching from everywhere at once. I moved toward the outskirts of the city, keeping to narrow back alleys, avoiding open spaces. The sky remained a dense gray, swirling occasionally with faint tremors of darker shapes, moving just beneath its surface. As I made my way toward the old highway, I noticed figures standing motionless along the sidewalks. People at first glance. But as I drew nearer, my stomach twisted. They were frozen mid-movement, mid-expression, their bodies stiff like mannequins hastily arranged. Some had their mouths open in silent screams. Others stared upward, eyes wide and unblinking. Shadows pooled unnaturally at their feet, the darkness thicker than it should have been, slowly expanding as though feeding on their stillness. I skirted around them, careful not to step on any of the spreading darkness. The further I walked, the more of them I saw, lining the streets like a silent audience watching something I couldn't see. When I reached the highway ramp, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of burning metal and damp earth. The horizon glowed faintly, but not with sunlight, more like a distant fire smoldering behind dense fog. I felt a pull toward it, an instinctive dread urging me to turn back, but there was nothing to return to, so I walked. The highway was cracked and overgrown, vines crawling from the medians, wrapping around abandoned cars. Some vehicles had their doors open, keys still in the ignition, as though their owners had vanished mid-flight. I avoided looking inside them, afraid of what shapes I might find slumped in the seats. Every few minutes, the ground vibrated, short pulses traveling through the asphalt, like the heartbeat of something enormous buried deep below. The vibrations grew stronger as I neared an overpass, and when I stepped beneath it, I heard something breathing above me. Slow, heavy breaths that rattled like loose stones inside a hollow chest. I crept forward, hugging the concrete wall, and risked a glance upward. Something enormous clung to the underside of the bridge, its limbs splayed out like a giant insect, but its body shrouded in shifting shadow. Its head was angled downward, as though listening for movement. I held my breath, inching forward one silent step at a time. A pebble skittered across the pavement. The creature froze. Then its head twisted unnatural degrees toward the sound. I ran before it finished turning. The shriek that followed shook the air, a piercing wail that made the sky ripple. I sprinted across the highway, diving behind a fallen signpost as the creature dropped from the overpass, its massive limbs striking the ground with bone-shaking force. Its body flickered, shifting between solid and shadow, as though reality struggled to contain it. It skittered across the pavement, searching, sniffing, its head snapping toward every faint sound. I stayed absolutely still, every muscle screaming. The creature paused, lifting its head toward the swirling sky, then let out another shriek before leaping onto a nearby building and vanishing into the gloom. My legs gave out, and I collapsed against the signpost, trembling uncontrollably. The air felt colder now, the sky darker, and somewhere in the distance, a new hum began, deeper, slower, more deliberate. Not a vibration, a signal. I followed the highway until I reached the outskirts, where buildings thinned out and fields stretched under the dim sky. The hum grew louder, coming from a cluster of communication towers silhouetted on a low hill. They were all shaking, vibrating so violently, I expected them to collapse. As I approached, I saw figures gathered around the base of the tallest tower. For a moment, hope flickered. Survivors. But as I drew closer, I noticed the way they stood, heads tilted back at identical angles, arms hanging limply, bodies swaying in sync with the hum. Their eyes were open, blank, reflecting nothing. The hum deepened, rippling through them like a shared heartbeat. Something inside the tower pulsed in response. A dark mass coiled around the metal supports, feeding on the vibrations. As I watched, one of the people twitched, a sudden, violent jerk that snapped their head to the side. Their lips parted, and a low whisper seeped out, carried by the wind. It wasn't words. It was an invitation. I backed away slowly, but the ground beneath me shifted. Cracks spread across the soil, forming branching patterns that glowed faintly with the same dull, unnatural light I'd seen in the clouds. The earth trembled as though something beneath it was waking. The tower's hum rose to a feverish pitch. The figures around it began to turn toward me, their movements synchronized and impossibly smooth. Their mouths opened wider, stretching into silent screams that never broke the air. I ran again, stumbling across the uneven ground as the cracks widened behind me. The hum echoed in my chest, vibrating through my ribs, urging me to stop, to listen, to give in. I covered my ears and kept running until the hum faded behind me. By the time I reached the forest at the edge of the fields, the sky had darkened to an almost solid black. Strange shapes slithered through the clouds, their outlines faint but unmistakably alive. The trees stood unnaturally still, their branches drooping as though weighed down by unseen hands. I hesitated before entering, but the open fields no longer felt safe. Inside the forest, the darkness thickened. Even with my hands stretched out, I could barely see my own fingers. Every step produced a muffled crunch, as though the forest floor absorbed sound rather than echoing it. At some point I realized the trees weren't just still, they were listening. Their trunks angled subtly toward me, their bark shifting like muscles beneath skin. When a branch brushed my shoulder, I flinched, stumbling backward. The branch recoiled like an animal, startled by its own boldness. Then, the entire forest exhaled. A wind surged through the trees, carrying whispers that grew louder, overlapping, until they formed something almost intelligible. They spoke of endings, of foundations cracking, of a world slipping out of its own skin. They spoke of shadows unbound and forgotten things, reclaiming what was theirs. I pressed on, ignoring the growing cold that seeped through my clothes. The whispers followed, weaving around me like invisible threads. At one point, I felt something tug gently at my sleeve. When I turned, there was nothing there, just darkness shifting under the trees. But the sleeve had been stretched as though pulled by a small hand. Hours passed, maybe more. Time felt fractured here, broken into pieces that no longer aligned. Eventually, I stumbled into a clearing illuminated by a faint, pulsing glow. At its center stood an old stone well, covered in moss and deep cracks. The glow seeped from its depths, casting long, trembling shadows across the grass. As I approached, a cold breeze rose from below, carrying a chorus of whispers that blended into a single message. "You are late." I stepped back, but the ground beneath me rippled, pushing me closer. I peered into the well. Something moved in the darkness far below, its shape enormous and shifting. The glow brightened, revealing a vast eye opening deep within the earth, staring up at me with ancient hunger. The ground trembled violently. The forest screamed. I ran. Branches clawed at me as I fled, the trees closing in as if trying to trap me. The forest roared behind me, a sound so loud it felt like the world was tearing open. I burst through the tree line and fell onto the cracked pavement of an abandoned road. The sky above writhed with dark shapes, swirling faster. A deep rumble shook the horizon. The hum returned, louder, more powerful than ever, spreading through the air like a command. The world answered. The ground split open along the horizon, a massive fissure tearing through fields, swallowing trees whole. Towers collapsed. Shadows poured from the cracks, rising into the sky like smoke. The clouds descended, twisting into forms too vast to comprehend. And from the center of it all, something emerged, something that dwarfed the skyline, its shape shifting between shadow and substance, its presence suffocating. The world bent around it, buildings tilting, roads warping, as though reality itself was shrinking away. I fell to my knees, unable to breathe under the crushing weight of the thing's gaze. It stretched across the sky, blotting out what little light remained. And then, slowly, it leaned closer. Its voice wasn't sound, it was thought, forced into my mind with the pressure of 1,000 hands. It showed me visions of the world unraveling, of shadows devouring cities, of skies turning inside out. It showed me what came before us and what would follow when the last remnants of our world dissolved. It whispered that the end wasn't coming. It was already here, and we had been living inside its awakening breath all along. The ground beneath me shifted again, and I realized the fissure was spreading toward me. I forced myself to stand, to run, though every step felt like wading through tar. Behind me, the colossal shadow creature let out a sound that made the world shudder, a signal to everything that lurked in the darkness. The tendrils descended, the shadows surged, the sky cracked open, revealing a vast pulsating void behind it, and through that void, more shapes began to emerge. I don't know how long I've been running now. The road stretches endlessly ahead, lit only by the faint, dying glow of a world being consumed. The hum follows me everywhere, pulsing in the ground, the air, my bones. I can feel the shadows closing in, stretching toward my feet, eager to claim what little remains untouched. I don't know if anyone else is still alive. I don't know if survival is even possible anymore. But I know this: the end of the world isn't a sudden event. It's a slow, deliberate unraveling, and it's happening now. Breath by breath, shadow by shadow, waiting for you to notice that something is already standing behind you, just outside the edge of the light. The road bent into a long, desolate stretch, bordered by skeletal trees that leaned inward like silent witnesses. Every few seconds, the hum beneath my feet surged, a slow, thunderous vibration that felt less like sound and more like a warning. I moved forward, though each step felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself thickened with every breath I stole from the dying world. The shadows along the roadside twitched, lengthening as I passed, some following my movement with unsettling synchronicity. They didn't rush me, didn't attack. They only watched, like predators that knew their prey had nowhere left to run. The sky above pulsed with faint glimmers of crimson buried inside the rolling darkness, as though lightning tried to escape but found itself trapped. Ahead, the broken outline of a gas station emerged through the haze, its sign hanging by a single bolt, swaying in wind that didn't touch anything else. I approached cautiously, listening for any hint of movement. The doors were shattered, glass scattered across the concrete like frozen tears. Inside, shelves lay toppled, their contents strewn across the floor, covered in a thin layer of soot. A faint flicker came from the corner, a small, battery-powered lantern, its light trembling like it was afraid of the dark surrounding it. I reached for it, and as my fingers brushed the handle, the lantern dimmed. Then, slowly, the beam expanded, casting a wider glow across the room. That was when I saw the writing on the far wall. At first, it looked like cracks, branching like lightning frozen mid-strike. But as the lantern brightened, letters appeared within the dark lines, jagged, uneven, carved into the drywall, like someone had written with trembling hands and broken fingernails. "Don't look at the sky." The message repeated several times, each version more distorted than the last, as though the writer had been dragged away mid-sentence. The final line trailed off into a smear that led toward the back room. The lantern flickered again. Then the hum outside rose sharply, rattling the walls. I backed away, gripping the lantern tightly. The back room door creaked open a few centimeters, though there was no wind to push it. A faint sound seeped out, soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on a wooden table. The tapping quickened. The lantern flickered violently, its light shrinking. The tapping turned into rapid scratching, frantic and desperate. I stumbled back toward the exit, just as the room fell completely dark. A shape moved inside, slow, dragging itself toward the door, its outline twisting unnaturally, as if reshaped with each movement. The lantern pulsed once, revealing a glimpse of something pale reaching out from the darkness, its fingers impossibly long and jointed in the wrong places. I bolted from the gas station, nearly slipping on the glass as the scratching inside erupted into a guttural shriek. Outside, the sky throbbed with a massive ripple, like a pulse traveling through a living organism. I kept my head down, remembering the scratched warning. Something heavy crashed behind me, the gas station roof buckling inward as though something huge had landed on it. I didn't look. I didn't dare. I ran across the cracked pavement and into the field behind the building, the ground trembling under my feet as the hum deepened, vibrating through my bones. The grass bent away from me, flattened by waves of invisible force rolling outward from the collapsing structure. I fell forward, catching myself on my hands, and the lantern clattered beside me. Its beam flickered wildly, illuminating the field in short, frantic bursts. In one of those flashes, I saw them, figures scattered across the grass, lying face down, motionless. At first, I thought they were bodies, remnants of people who hadn't made it this far. But when the lantern flashed again, their heads were turned toward me. Not fully, just enough that their eyes, glossy and unblinking, caught the trembling light. Their bodies didn't move, but their gaze followed me. Hundreds of them. The hum surged again, and the nearest figure twitched, its spine arching in a sharp, unnatural snap. Another followed, then another. I scrambled backward, lantern shaking in my grip as the figures began to rise. Not smoothly, not naturally, but piece by piece, like marionettes pulled up by invisible strings. Their mouths opened slowly, impossibly wide, yet no sound escaped. They stood facing me, swaying in perfect unison. Their shadows merging into one massive pool of darkness that spread across the field like ink spilled over a page. The hum stopped. Silence swallowed everything, so sudden, so absolute, that the air itself felt empty. Then every figure in the field turned toward the sky. I squeezed my eyes shut, resisting the urge to look, to understand what held their attention so completely. A soft wind brushed past me, carrying the faintest whisper, like a voice speaking from inside my own mind. Look, the whisper grew stronger, building pressure behind my eyelids, clawing for attention. Look. My jaw clenched. I pressed my nails into my palms until I felt skin break. The whisper grew into a command. Look. I dropped the lantern and covered my ears, though the voice wasn't coming from outside. The air grew colder, heavy with expectation. The field of figures stood impossibly still behind me, waiting. I forced myself forward, crawling blindly through the grass until my fingers brushed pavement again. The whisper faded slightly, replaced by a distant rumble like thunder dragging across the sky. I opened my eyes just enough to see the road ahead, then pushed myself to my feet and ran without looking back. The sky cracked behind me. The sound was like stone splitting under an ancient weight, a deep roar that trembled through the earth. Heat washed against my back, followed by a sudden, suffocating chill. The shadows ahead lengthened, reaching toward me like hands eager to pull me into their depths. I could feel something enormous descending, its presence pressing against the world. Like a lid being lowered onto a box, the road twisted beneath my feet, contorting as though trying to throw me off. The roar grew louder, the air thicker, and the hum returned, this time inside my skull, pulsing behind my eyes. And then I heard it, breathing, slow, deliberate breathing behind me, closer than before, closer than anything alive should ever be. The breathing behind me grew heavier, each exhale rolling across my spine like a wave of cold fog. I didn't dare slow down, not even to blink for too long. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of cracked asphalt, vanishing into darkness that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Every step I took felt stolen, borrowed time carved out of a world that no longer wanted me in it. The shadows on either side of the road thickened, rising like walls, pressing inward with an intent that felt almost sentient. They quivered as though excited by my presence, as though waiting for the perfect moment to collapse around me. But none of them moved forward, not yet. It felt like they were holding their breath, listening for something else. The breathing behind me deepened. I forced myself to keep my gaze ahead, but the weight of that presence tugged at the corners of my vision, begging for acknowledgement. A part of me, some primal, trembling fragment of instinct, knew that turning around would mean surrendering to something ancient, something hungry. I couldn't do that. Not yet. The hum beneath the ground returned in short bursts, irregular and sharp, like whatever was causing it was struggling to regain control of its rhythm. With every pulse, the asphalt trembled, and faint cracks spread outward like veins. Up ahead, through the low haze, I glimpsed a faint glow, soft, golden, flickering. Firelight. Impossible, yet unmistakable. I pushed myself toward it, lungs burning, legs shaking. As I drew closer, the shape of a building emerged from the gloom. A small wooden church, old and crooked, its steeple bent at an angle, as if bowing to something towering above it. Warm light leaked through the windows, casting trembling beams across the ground. The air around the church felt different. Not safe. Nothing was safe anymore, but less suffocating, as though whatever forces plagued the rest of the world hesitated here. The breathing behind me paused. I darted toward the door, each step faster than the last. The church loomed closer, its walls trembling slightly with the flickering light inside. When I reached the entrance, my hand wrapped around the cold handle, and the breathing behind me turned into a sharp, sudden inhale, like a predator preparing to strike. I threw myself inside and slammed the door. The instant the wood shut, the world outside fell utterly quiet. Inside, the air shimmered with a faint heat from dozens of candles scattered around the pews. Their flames bent unnaturally, all tilting toward the center of the room where the altar stood. The altar itself was covered in old cloth burned at the edges, and in the center sat an object that made my skin tighten. A cracked mirror mounted in a rusted metal frame. It faced the entrance, reflecting the rows of candles and casting fragments of warped light across the walls. I took a cautious step forward. The floorboards creaked loudly, too loudly, as though the sound didn't echo in the room but in my head. The candles flickered in response. When I approached the mirror, the air around it distorted subtly, bending like heat waves rising from asphalt. My reflection appeared, but it was delayed, half a second behind my movements, as though unsure how to mimic me. Its eyes were darker than they should have been. I took another step closer, and my reflection didn't move at all. The candles extinguished themselves in perfect unison. Darkness swallowed the church. My breath caught. The ground trembled beneath my feet as the hum surged violently, shaking the walls. And from somewhere deep inside the mirror came a sound. Not a whisper, not a breath, but the distinct scrape of nails dragging across glass from the other side. My reflection lifted its head, not in sync with me, but independently. Its mouth opened, stretching wider and wider until it formed a jagged, unnatural grin. Something moved behind it, tall shapes, towering shapes, their limbs bending like shadows forced into flesh. The mirror pulsed, its cracked surface glowing faintly, each fracture shimmering like a doorway straining to open. I stumbled back as the reflection slowly raised its hand, not in greeting, but in warning. Its eyes, pitch black, flicked toward the church door. A low, deep thud shook the entrance. Then another. Then another. Each strike rattled the wooden frame, dust falling from the rafters. Whatever had followed me to the church was now trying to get inside. The mirror flickered, my reflection vanishing in bursts, before reappearing in distorted fragments The dark shapes behind it pressed closer, their outlines sharpening with each pulse of the cracks. The pounding at the door grew frantic. I backed toward the mirror, hesitating, terrified, but trapped between two horrors. The glass rippled like water, touched by a cold breeze. My reflection leaned forward, closer to the inside of the mirror's surface, raising its hand again, but this time pointing slowly, deliberately, beneath the altar. Another crash. The door splintered. I dropped to my knees and reached under the altar, fingers brushing against something metal, a small latch. I pulled it, and a narrow panel slid open, revealing a staircase descending into complete darkness. The pounding at the entrance escalated into a frenzy. The candles on the floor flickered back to life for a brief instant, their flames bending toward the staircase as if urging me downward. The mirror cracked further, a long, thin fracture running across its center like an opening eye. The door behind me shattered. I didn't wait to see what stepped inside. I threw myself down the staircase, pulled the panel shut, and plunged into darkness as the church above erupted in screams that didn't belong to anything human. The darkness swallowed me instantly, a complete and suffocating black that felt alive, pressing close to my skin as though eager to seep beneath it. The staircase was narrow, the walls cold and damp, and each step groaned under my weight, as though warning the depths below that something new was descending. I kept one hand on the wall, tracing rough stone that seemed to pulse faintly, as though something behind it shifted with my movements. Above me, muffled crashes shook the wooden floor of the church, followed by a dragging sound, slow, deliberate, like something enormous pulling itself across broken pews. I didn't dare turn back. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, the air grew colder, thick with the scent of wet earth and old metal. A faint glow pulsed ahead, weak and sickly, illuminating a long corridor stretching into darkness. The walls here were lined with scratched symbols, circles intersecting jagged lines, shapes that hurt my eyes when I tried to focus on them. Some were smeared as if someone had tried to wipe them away in panic. Others were fresh, carved deep, oozing a thin, dark liquid that glistened under the dim light. I moved forward, carefully, each step echoing too loudly in the narrow space. The corridor twisted sharply, leading to a larger chamber where the faint glow intensified. The light came from a cluster of lanterns arranged in a crude circle around a stone slab. The slab was massive, cracked down the middle, with iron chains dangling from both ends. The chains rattled softly, though there was no wind. The ground here was uneven, scattered with stones and strange, brittle remnants that looked like fragments of old tools or bones. A sudden metallic clang behind me made my heart seize. I spun around. The staircase panel had swung open again, yet no one had come down. The darkness beyond the opening seemed thicker now, almost liquid, and something shifted within it, breaking the blackness into ripples. I backed away slowly, but the air around me pulsed with a low resonance, as though the very room was breathing. Then I heard it, a whisper, not words, not language, just sound, soft, trembling, seeping from every corner of the chamber. It floated toward me like cold fingers brushing the back of my neck. The lantern flames flickered violently, bending toward the far wall where the shadows were deepest. As I approached cautiously, I noticed a narrow crack in the stone, just wide enough for light to seep through. but the light coming from within wasn't lantern light. It pulsed like a heartbeat, slow, heavy, ancient. I knelt beside the crack and peered inside. At first, all I saw was darkness. Then an eye opened. It wasn't human, too large, too deep, its surface swirling with reflections that didn't belong to the chamber around me. Something vast shifted behind it, a mass of shifting darkness pressed tightly against the stone wall as though waiting patiently, endlessly, for this moment. The eye blinked once, and the floor beneath me trembled, dust falling from the ceiling. A voice, not spoken, but felt, rushed into my head like cold water. "You weren't supposed to come here." I stumbled back, clutching my skull as a wave of dizziness hit me. The chains on the stone slab rattled more violently now, as though reacting to the presence behind the wall. The lanterns dimmed, their flames rising into thin, elongated points. The whispering grew louder, forming words this time, broken, overlapping, spoken by many voices, but all directed at me. "It's waking. It's waking. It's waking." The floor split suddenly, a thin crack racing across the chamber and stopping at my feet. A deep, throbbing hum rose from below, far stronger than any I had felt on the surface. My teeth vibrated, my vision blurred, the air thickened, making every breath feel like inhaling smoke. I stumbled toward the slab, but the hum intensified, forcing me to my knees. Then the staircase above slammed shut. Darkness swallowed the chamber again, but not completely. A second glow appeared, faint at first, then stronger, emanating from the chain-bound slab itself. The crack running down its center widened slowly, releasing a cold draft that smelled of rot and old soil. Something moved beneath the stone, slow, deliberate stretching, like limbs unfolding after centuries of stillness. I scrambled back, heart pounding. The chains tightened, straining violently. One snapped. The sound echoed like a thunderclap, rattling the lanterns and shaking the floor. The whispering turned into a frantic chorus, dozens of voices hissing warnings, pleas, commands. The chains continued to strain, one by one, snapping like brittle twigs under immense force. The stone slab began to rise. I stumbled backward until my back hit the cold wall. The crack behind me flared with light, the eye widening, pupils dilating with anticipation. Dust fell in heavy sheets from the ceiling as the entire chamber trembled. A low growl, not animal, not human, rumbled through the air. The slab lifted fully, falling aside with a crushing slam. Something crawled out. At first, only a hand, long, pale, with fingers that dragged against the stone. Then another. They gripped the ground, pulling a massive, distorted form forward. Its shape shifted as it moved, as though struggling to remember how to exist in a world of light. Its head lifted slowly, revealing a face, or something trying to imitate one. Hollow sockets, no mouth, skin stretched too thin over bone-like structures that bent and twisted. The voices around me screamed in unison, "Run!" But my legs refused to move. The creature stood, towering over me, its limbs dragging against the ground with shrill scraping sounds. It turned its hollow gaze toward me. The hum intensified, vibrating through my bones until tears blurred my vision. The creature tilted its head, studying me with unnatural stillness. Then it took a step forward, and another. And the whisper behind me, behind the wall, spoke once more. "If you move now, it will follow." The creature's hollow gaze locked onto me, and the air around it thickened until every breath scraped painfully through my chest. It moved with an unnerving slowness, as though savoring each step, its limbs dragging along the stone floor with a sharp metallic grind that echoed throughout the chamber. I tried to steady myself against the wall, but the surface behind me pulsed faintly, alive, reacting to the presence that now dominated the room. The hum intensified again, vibrating through the stone, the air, my bones. The whispering that had once been scattered and vague now condensed into a single voice, speaking directly from the crack behind me. "Don't move." The creature paused mid-step, head tilting at an angle so sharp I heard tendons, or whatever held it together, stretch and creak. Its body shifted, rippling like liquid trapped within a thin, fragile shell. The hollow sockets where eyes should have been seemed to widen, darkening as they focused on the slightest tremor of breath leaving my lips. It took another step, this time faster, the chains around the slab clattering violently, as though pulled by invisible force. The whisper behind me pressed deeper into my mind, colder now, more desperate. "If you move, the chamber will wake. If you don't, it will take you." The choice was unbearable: remain and be consumed by the towering thing approaching, or flee and risk awakening something even worse, lurking within the walls beneath my fingertips. The creature's elongated fingers brushed the ground, dragging forward, leaving deep grooves in the stone. Its featureless face leaned closer, inches from my own. I could feel the cold radiating from it, an ancient cold, a burial cold. Then it exhaled. The breath was not warm, not human. It felt like standing at the mouth of a collapsing cave, the airs pulled backward into an endless void. My vision blurred, my legs buckled. Instinct overtook fear. Without thinking, I threw myself sideways, rolling across the chamber just as the creature lunged. The sound that erupted from it was unlike anything I had heard, an anguished, bone-rattling shriek that seemed to come from deep within its hollow chest. Its limbs slammed into the wall where I had stood, cracking the stone. The eye behind that very crack widened, light flaring so intensely I had to shield my face. The creature recoiled violently, stumbling backward as if scorched by the sudden brightness. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the nearest lantern. Its flame flickered wildly, reacting to the chaos. The creature twisted, limbs jerking in frantic, unnatural angles, but it kept its hollow gaze fixed on me. The whispering in the chamber rose to a frenzy, voices overlapping in panic. "Don't go to the stairs. Don't go to the wall. Don't let it touch you." But the creature was already moving again, faster now, limbs stretching, growing, reshaping with every step. Its torso split along the center, revealing more hollow space within, a cavern of darkness that swallowed the lantern's light without reflection. It lunged again. I hurled the lantern at its chest. The glass shattered, flames erupting across its body, not burning, but illuminating. The creature screeched, stumbling backward as the fire clung to its skin like liquid gold. Its form convulsed, collapsing inward, then expanding in sudden bursts as if struggling to maintain shape. For a brief moment, the fire exposed something inside it. Shadows writhing like trapped serpents, twisting violently beneath a membrane of pale flesh, but the fire wouldn't hold it for long. The hum beneath the ground intensified into a deep, rolling vibration that threatened to throw me off my feet. Cracks spiderwebbed across the floor, glowing faintly as something massive stirred below. The chamber itself groaned, stone grinding against stone. The voice behind the wall spoke again, no longer a whisper, but a command that thundered through my skull. Run. This time I didn't hesitate. I sprinted across the chamber, narrowly dodging the creature's flailing limbs as it clawed at the floor, trying to regain balance. The stairway was sealed, the wall crack widening dangerously, the stone slab behind me glowing as though preparing to open again. There was nowhere safe, but a narrow fissure near the farthest lantern caught my eye. An opening I hadn't noticed before, its edges jagged and freshly split by the tremors. It wasn't an exit. It was a tunnel, barely wide enough to crawl through. Behind me, the creature's shriek pierced the chamber, followed by the thunderous slam of its limbs hitting the ground. Gaining speed, the air warped violently as it lunged, the dark cavity in its chest stretching open like a maw ready to consume. I dove headfirst into the fissure. The stone tore at my arms as I dragged myself forward, the tunnel barely giving enough space to breathe. Behind me, the creature slammed into the opening, its clawed fingers scraping violently against the stone mere inches from my feet. It thrashed, howling, its limbs bending inward to squeeze through, but the tunnel was too narrow, too irregular. It clawed relentlessly, cracking the stone, widening the passage inch by inch. The ground shook harder, dust rained down. A deep roar echoed from the depths below, louder now, closer. Something else, something much larger, was waking beneath the chamber. I crawled faster, ignoring the fire in my lungs, the cuts burning along my skin. The tunnel split ahead into two paths, one sloping down into pitch black, the other angling upward toward a faint, trembling glow. I chose the light. Behind me, the creature shrieked again, the pitch rising sharply as the stone finally gave way. It was coming through. I scrambled toward the glow, my legs burning, heart pounding so violently I felt it in my fingertips. The tunnel widened suddenly, opening into another chamber, this one smaller but brighter, illuminated by a circle of pale crystals embedded in the floor. They pulsed softly, emitting a cold, ghostly light. In the center lay something wrapped in dark cloth, unmoving. The hum fell silent. The chamber held its breath. And from behind me, echoing through the tunnel, came the sound of approaching claws, slow, deliberate, savoring the last few seconds before reaching me. The bundle at the center of the crystal-lit chamber seemed to draw the cold light into itself, as though the cloth were absorbing every flicker and pulse around it. I stepped toward it carefully, each movement slow and deliberate, aware that the faint scrape of claws behind me was growing louder. The tunnel mouth pulsed with shifting shadow as the creature squeezed through, its limbs bending, snapping, reshaping to force its way closer. I could feel its gaze even without looking back, hollow, hungry, patient. The crystals embedded in the floor pulsed faster, reacting either to my presence or to the horror approaching from the tunnel. A low resonance vibrated through the stone, humming beneath my feet, threading into my bones like cold wires. The cloth bundle stirred, just barely, a tremor beneath the dark wrappings, subtle enough to question whether it was movement or merely a trick of the trembling floor. But it moved again, definite this time. The creature behind me snarled, its claws clicking against the stone as it dragged itself free of the tunnel's tight grip. I forced myself fully into the chamber, stepping into the circle of pale crystals. The hum rose sharply, a protective barrier or a warning. I couldn't tell. The moment my foot crossed the circular pattern, the crystals flared with cold light, casting long, shivering beams across the walls. The creature at the tunnel's mouth froze, its limbs twisted inward, its hollow face retracting slightly as though repelled by the glow. Its body quivered violently, the darkness inside it rippling like boiling oil. It scraped a claw against the stone, testing the edge of the circle. The light pulsed once, sharply like a heartbeat. The creature recoiled. For the first time since I had seen it, it hesitated. I turned my attention to the bundle. It lay perfectly centered within the crystal circle, wrapped in thick, tar-black cloth that seemed to drink in the faint glow. As I leaned closer, the hum beneath the stone deepened, vibrating the air with a low, mournful tone that felt almost like a warning. The bundle twitched again, harder this time. The cloth stretched as though something inside shifted under its own weight. I reached toward it and immediately froze. A whisper brushed against my ear, though no one stood beside me. "Don't uncover it." The voice wasn't the same as the whispers in the other chamber. It was softer, older, threaded with exhaustion and fear. I scanned the room, but no one else was there. The crystals dimmed slightly, flickering like stars smothered by fog. The bundle pulsed once, as though responding to the voice. Behind me, the creature scraped its claws again, dragging them slowly across the floor near the tunnel entrance. The sound echoed through the chamber like metal, tearing through bone. It stepped forward, testing the boundary of the crystal circle once more. Its elongated foot hovered just above the glowing stone, then snapped back as a thin arc of cold light cracked upward like lightning. The creature hissed, retreating just enough to gather itself. It wasn't giving up. It was waiting for the light to weaken, waiting for me to make a mistake, or waiting for whatever lay inside the bundle to reveal itself. I crouched beside the wrapped object, the cloth cold against my fingertips. The hum shifted again as though adjusting to my touch. Something inside pressed upward, straining against the tight layers of fabric, not thrashing, not violent. The movement was slow, rhythmic, almost like breathing. I pulled my hand back. The whisper returned closer this time, brushing my mind like a chill breeze. "Don't let it see the light." The cloth-covered shape trembled, the wrappings stretching unnaturally tight. I stepped back, but the hum intensified, forcing me closer again, drawing me to the center of the circle. The crystals around me flickered, less steady now, dimming at the edges. Whatever protection the circle offered was weakening. The creature sensed it. It leaned forward, hollow eyes sharpening, its limbs folding inward like a grotesque insect preparing to strike. Its chest opened slightly, revealing the dark cavity inside it, swelling, contracting, expanding, as though inhaling. The sound of air rushing into that hollow space was sickening, wet, cold. It was preparing to devour whatever left the circle first, me or the thing beneath the cloth. I knew I couldn't stay still. I had to choose, either uncover the bundle or protect it, or run, if the circle allowed me to leave at all. The bundle shifted again. This time, something pushed from inside with enough force to lift part of the cloth. A thin line of pale light leaked out from beneath the wrapped layers, soft, warm, alive. Not the cold light of the crystals, not the sickly glow of the tunnels. Something purer, something entirely different from anything I had seen since the sky fell and the world twisted into this nightmare. The creature recoiled instantly, shrieking, its limbs collapsing like melted wax before reforming again. The light from the bundle cut through its form, slicing faint, glowing cracks through the shadow flesh that composed its body. The creature retreated deeper into the tunnel, its shrieks bending the air into unnatural vibrations. The bundle glowed brighter. The cloth quivered, splitting slightly along one seam. A small hand, pale, trembling, slipped through the gap. Human, or something trying to be. The chamber fell silent. The crystals froze mid-flicker. The hum beneath the floor ceased entirely. And the voice, no longer a whisper but a fragile echo, spoke again. "Help me, before they wake it." The tiny hand emerging from the torn cloth trembled as though the effort of reaching outward had drained whatever fragile strength lingered beneath the wrappings. It flexed once, slowly, weakly, fingers curling toward the cold air of the chamber. Pale light seeped from the cracks between its knuckles, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat, desperately trying to continue. The crystals around the circle flickered again, but did not dim further. Instead, they leaned their glow inward, as if drawn to the fragile radiance emanating from the hand. The hum beneath the floor resumed, different now, not chaotic, not the bone-deep vibration that heralded something monstrous awakening in the depths. This hum was softer, tentative, as though the very stone beneath me had begun listening. Behind me, the creature in the tunnel let out a low rasp, a scraping growl that vibrated through the walls. The pale light emerging from the bundle wounded it. That much was clear, but the creature didn't flee. It hovered just outside the crystal boundary, limbs trembling, body pressed flat against the stone like an enormous shadow pinned by its own malice. Its hollow sockets narrowed, its elongated face twisting in something between agony and rage as the faint glow scraped across its surface. Yet even in its suffering, it waited, tense, calculating, confident the light's strength would fade. I hesitated only a moment before kneeling by the bundle again. The trembling hand struggled to lift itself, tiny muscles spasming. Something about its movement, its fragility, felt terribly human and terribly wrong for this place. As I reached toward it, the whisper returned, curling around my thoughts like smoke. If you free it, the chamber will open. If you leave it, the darkness will claim it. The cloth shifted again beneath my hands, the shape underneath twisting with pained urgency. I hooked my fingers beneath the torn edge of the wrappings and pulled gently. The fabric resisted, sticky in places as though fused to something beneath, but with enough pressure, it began to unravel. Layer by layer, the cloth loosened, revealing more pale skin beneath, a small arm trembling violently, veins glowing faint blue under its surface. The hum deepened again, harmonizing with the pulse inside the crystals. The creature screeched, slamming its limbs against the tunnel's stone frame. The chamber walls trembled, dust raining down in thin streams. Its shadow stretched further toward the circle, warping unnaturally, testing the limits of the glowing boundary. The pale light from the child-shaped form beneath the cloth fought back, flickering with each pulse of the hum. I tore the cloth further. A face came into view, small, delicate, eyes tightly shut, as though in pain or fear. Its skin looked almost translucent, veins shimmering like faint threads of light beneath the surface. The child's chest rose in shallow, stuttering breaths, each exhale glowing faintly. It wasn't a newborn. It was older, perhaps 6 or 7, but frail, impossibly so, as if it had never known sunlight or air until this moment. The whisper in the chamber shifted, no longer words, but a soft hum that echoed the rhythm of the crystals. The child stirred, eyelids fluttering. A low groan escaped its lips, barely audible, yet filled with a weight of exhaustion that made my chest tighten. I reached out instinctively, but the crystals surged with light, forcing my hand back. They weren't protecting me. They were protecting it. The child's eyes opened. For an instant, I forgot how to breathe. There was no color in them, no pupils, no irises, only a soft, swirling glow of pale light, moving like mist inside glass. The moment its gaze met mine, a shock ran through my body, a sharp, cold jolt that wasn't pain, but memory. Not my memory, someone else's. A landscape under a normal sky, a river cutting through sunlight, a city untouched by shadow. And then it faded. The child blinked slowly, reaching its small hand toward me again. This time, the crystals dimmed rather than flared, allowing the space between us to close. Then the chamber floor cracked. A deep, rupturing sound tore through the stone beneath the crystal circle. Light surged from the fissure, not cold or pale, but violent and molten, as though something beneath us had reached the limit of its confinement. The child gasped, body convulsing once, as the hum rose into an agonized crescendo. The creature in the tunnel screeched with renewed fury. It lunged. This time, the boundary only slowed it. The crystals flickered erratically. One dimmed completely, the light sputtering out like a dying candle. The creature's limb breached the boundary for a fraction of a second before recoiling. But it had learned something from that moment of contact. The light was fading. The child clutched my sleeve weakly. "Help me." The voice wasn't spoken aloud, but pressed directly into my mind, soft yet desperate. The floor shook harder. A second fissure split open, widening rapidly. The chamber ceiling groaned, thin cracks tracing upward, scattering dust and fragments. The creature lunged again, harder, faster, slamming its twisted form against the edge of the circle. The crystals dimmed further. Cold light sputtered. Its claws scraped across the stone mere inches from my foot. I had no choice. I scooped the frail child into my arms. The chamber reacted instantly. The crystals flared once more, but not protectively. Instead, their light shot upward, tracing jagged paths along the walls like frantic warnings. The hum shifted pitch, vibrating the entire cavern with panicked urgency. The creature roared, pulling its limbs free and preparing another strike, this one lethal, desperate, final. The floor beneath the circle gave way. The stone collapsed under me in an instant, turning the ground into a maze of falling debris and blinding light. I felt myself plummet downward, the child's weight, feather light in my arms, its thin fingers gripping my shirt with surprising strength. The roar of the creature above faded quickly, replaced by the rushing howl of wind tearing through vast unseen depths. We fell, down, down, into darkness lit only by the fading pulse of the crystals above. And then a light bloomed beneath us, not cold, not monstrous, warm, alive, waiting. The light rising beneath us grew brighter, expanding in a soft, spherical bloom that slowed our fall until the rushing wind thinned into a quiet, trembling stillness. My feet touched solid ground, stone that hummed with a low, resonant throb, steady as a heartbeat. The child in my arms loosened its grip, blinking slowly as its eyes adjusted to the strange glow bathing the cavern. This place was unlike any I had seen above. Vast, cathedral-like, with walls that shimmered as though carved from translucent mineral. Rivers of pale light flowed through cracks in the stone, weaving a network of veins pulsing in rhythm with the chamber's deep breath. I set the child down gently. It swayed, fragile but upright, the faint glow under its skin intensifying with every step it took toward the center of the cavern. There, raised on a smooth pedestal, stood an enormous structure, an archway of living stone, its surface shifting like sand in a breeze, though it never lost its shape. Within the arch, darkness churned like an ocean under a moonless sky. The child raised its trembling hand, and the darkness rippled in response. A whisper spread through the chamber, soft but everywhere. "It has woken, and so must you." I spun around, searching for the source, but the voice belonged to the cavern itself. The glowing veins along the walls brightened, revealing shapes long buried in the rock, faces frozen in expressions of awe and terror, their mouths open as if caught mid-prayer or mid-scream, stone fingers pressed outward from the walls, reaching toward the arch, but never quite touching it. The child stepped closer to the swirling void, its light growing even brighter. The cavern trembled, as though preparing for something inevitable. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, the air tightening with a pressure that made my ears throb. Then, from far above, a screech split the world apart. The creature had found us. Its shadow crashed through the fissure we'd fallen from, spiraling downward like a twisting storm of limbs and hollow hunger. It landed hard, the impact sending fractures racing across the glowing stone, dimming the veins one by one. The cavern shrieked, a chorus of 1,000 buried voices rising in panic. The child's glow flickered. The creature lunged. I grabbed the child, pulling it away from the arch just as a massive claw struck the stone where it had stood. The impact sent shards of glowing rock spraying in all directions, their light extinguishing the moment they hit the ground. The creature twisted, limbs elongating, face splitting open to reveal an empty void that emitted a low, bone-deep resonance, a call to everything that lurked in the unseen dark. The cavern answered. Shadows peeled away from the walls, sliding across the floor like ink drawn toward gravity. They gathered behind the creature, swelling into a mass of trembling darkness that writhed as if eager to devour the last shred of light in the chamber. The child clutched my arm, its voice trembling inside my mind. If it reaches the arch, the world above ends. The shadows surged. The child stepped forward, pulling free of my grasp, its glow brightening until its skin looked almost unbearably luminous. It lifted its hands toward the archway, and the swirling dark within it recoiled like a living thing. The cavern shook violently. The veins in the walls throbbed faster, pumping light into the floor beneath our feet. The creature screamed, an agonizing, fractured sound that shattered stalactites overhead. It charged. The child turned its glowing face toward me, eyes wide, not with fear, but with a strange, sorrowful resolve. "You must help me." Before I could react, a burst of light erupted from the child's chest, shooting upward like a column of living fire. The blast struck the creature mid-lunge, hurling it backward with enough force to embed it into the cavern wall. The shadows behind it screamed as the light tore through them, dissolving their shape until nothing remained but dark dust swirling in the heated air. The child collapsed. I caught it before it hit the ground, its glow now faint, flickering like a candle struggling against wind. The archway pulsed violently, the darkness inside it shrinking, coiling, retreating. But the cavern shook harder, cracks splitting open across the ground. Light spilled through them, but this time it wasn't warm. It was blinding, raw, uncontrollable. The child opened its dim eyes. One more step, carry me. The ground fractured beneath my feet as I lifted the child and pressed forward toward the arch. The creature, half crushed, half melted by the blast, dragged itself free of the stone, its limbs shaking with rage. It scraped across the floor, pulling its enormous body toward us with desperate fury. The archway flared, the child's faint glow synchronized with it, each pulse weaker, faster. Now, the voice whispered inside my head, step through before it follows. I stepped into the arch. The world shattered. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. No sound, no sight, no breath, only a sensation of falling sideways through a place without direction, without meaning, without reality. Then, light, cold, gray twilight, wind. I stumbled forward, collapsing onto damp earth, grass, trees, a sky heavy with storm clouds, but not the unnatural, writhing sky I had fled from. A normal sky. The child lay in my arms, its glow fading rapidly, breath shallow. Behind me, the arch flickered. Cracks crawled across its surface. Something slammed into it from the other side. The stone bulged outward, as if strained by enormous weight. A hollow roar echoed through the opening, shaking the trees around me. The arch flickered again, once, twice, its glow sputtering like a dying star. The child clutched my shirt weakly. If it breaks, it comes through. The arch split. Just before the collapsing stone sealed entirely, a single, long, impossible limb punched through, clawing blindly at the air. And then, silence. The arch crumbled into dust. The limb vanished with it. The field around me grew still, the wind easing, the hum gone. Truly gone. The child exhaled one last faint breath and went still in my arms, its glow fading completely. Only the sky remained above us, gray and heavy, yet free of shadows. But as I knelt there, catching my breath, I felt something cold brush the back of my neck. Not the wind. Something else. Something watching. Something waiting.